Yes, and I'm going to do it again.
Yeah, there you go.
We said at the beginning that we weave it in all over the place.
There we go.
There we go. And that was a callback.
You're listening to Unfinished Minds.
A podcast about learning, teaching, and staying curious in a messy, ever-changing world.
We're Amy and Ben, partners in life and in business. We've spent the last 20 years exploring what it means to learn on purpose, whether in classrooms, in companies, or in parenting.
Each week, we pick a big question and have an honest conversation about how people grow, what it means to teach well, and why learning still matters, especially when the world feels uncertain.
Whether you're a parent, a teacher, a leader, or just a curious soul, we're glad you're here. Hey Ben, you've done improv workshops in classes before, right?
I have, yeah.
And there's this wonderful, I remember you coming home after maybe the first one and talking about this cardinal rule.
Oh, yes, and.
The yes and, absolutely. And how wonderful it was and how collaborative it was and how freeing it was to not be told no.
I was terrified about this improv class. Yeah, I had been on oodles of business calls and been in front of classrooms, done lots of public speaking, but something about this just terrified me. And right from the beginning, this idea that you don't float bad ideas, you don't get turned down, you don't get shut down, that collaboratively everyone is building on what other people are bringing. It was really powerful, and it really, for me, eliminated a lot of that terror, that abject terror of starting something very, very different. And I think that yes and approach has kind of woven its way into a lot of what we do.
Yes, and
Oh, nice.
In fact, I really wanted to talk about a yes and approach to learning today, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
Yes, and
let's do it.
Okay, very good. So, well, because it's supposed to be a positive experience, a bolstering, affirming experience, let's take a positive spin on this. And in terms of learning, what can be gained from doing a yes and approach instead of, cutting off a learner?
I go back to that abject terror I felt at entering this scenario. And I don't think most, or certainly even many, learning environments are terrifying, but they might be for some people. So knowing that you can bring things and that it is collaborative, that it's a place that fosters curiosity is, I think, a really powerful view of the way, we certainly like to see learning environments.
I think it fits with the whole 21st century learning skills list as well. These not quite as technical, but transferable and durable and, lasting skills that we expect not just children, but adults to learn right now too. This is how you navigate and survive the 21st century. So I'm thinking of things like collaboration that you've touched on, critical thinking, having to pull an idea apart and put it back together and weigh one idea against another. Things like creativity, being able to think on your feet and think of a million different uses for the same idea. Just all of that is worth it to put people in an environment where it's supportive and it's collaborative and it's forward moving.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about the learning environment, but in the reality of all of the climates, political, workplace, even the environment, literally the climate, there's uncertainty, there's ambiguity, there's vulnerability, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. And I think there's a dual benefit to this kind of approach because it brings all ideas to the table. At least it allows all ideas to be brought to the table. And secondly, it builds in people, I think, a level of comfort with not totally knowing what's coming next and being able to run with it. I think we've talked in the past about the academic triage that takes place when students are going through high school and post-secondary, when there isn't enough time to do everything. You end up starting to focus on just the things that are worth most. And you don't necessarily think about the hard things or the different things or the challenging things. And you can enter the workforce maybe never having had to think on your feet.
In which case you're going to get a lot of no.
Yeah. And certainly improv is a way to make sure you're thinking on your feet.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you remember there's an episode of The Office?
Yes.
And I think it's Michael who takes an improv class, and it's kind of an example of the very polar opposite
Right.
of yes
What
and.
not to do.
Yeah. And he is the very embodiment of no.
Yeah, he shows up as his FBI agent character, I think Michael
In
Scorn,
every
and
scene
he
that he
pulls out
can.
his finger guns and just shoots dead every single person
Yeah.
as they start the scene.
Yeah.
And, not only is it really clear, everyone is very frustrated. One of the things that I think is the most funny is that facilitator is trying to adhere to his own rules about allowing yes and not just kicking him out, but he says, okay, Michael, give me all your guns. And he has to hand
Yeah. All
him
his
all of
imaginary
the
guns.
imaginary guns. And not surprisingly, you shoot everybody down, even if it's with your finger
Even if
guns.
it's just metaphorical.
Then you're left alone on the stage and nobody is reacting or adding to what you're doing.
And no one else gets to say anything
And no one
either,
else
right?
gets to say anything.
They're imaginary corpses.
Yeah, and I think that there are learning environments where it can feel like that. And so you're afraid to put up your hand because you're afraid you're going to be shot down.
I have actually have an example.
Okay.
And I've got examples from when I was a child too, because being a Gen Xer, I did have a learning environment as a child where there was no, where there was lots of no, no, wrong, bad, stop, that kind of thing. But I'm thinking of a workshop that I went to as a grown up, as a professional,
Fully formed adult
fully
human
formed
being.
adult human being,
Well, I think technically you were paying for this facilitator too.
probably, yeah. And I'll admit, I came into this particular workshop late. I think I was standing in for someone else who couldn't make it, so I didn't know kind of the vibe of it or how things went. And I did my best, but when the facilitator came by, we were in groups doing this exercise. When the facilitator came by, she actually very loudly said, "No." She made the buzzer noise at me. No, no, wrong. Like actually
I
said the
remember this.
words, like
I remember
totally.
this.
And then said something like, it's kind of like watching a train wreck. I got so much no in that. And I was a willing pupil too. And that not only shut me down for that exercise, I didn't want to say anything else, but the whole rest of the workshop, nothing she said stuck. I was so overwhelmed with no that
Right.
I couldn't learn anything else.
Yeah, and maybe not surprisingly, she didn't come back.
No. There was no and to that. Yeah. So let's talk about what's wrong with no. Are there situations where you have to say no? Have you, either as an instructor or an educator or as a learner, can you think of examples or subject areas where no applies, where you can't just do the yes and?
Certainly, there are moments where there are correct answers and there are incorrect answers. And the workshop that you were just talking about was leadership training, collaboration. And, I think you could argue that could have been handled in a way where there was a yes and to whatever you were saying. If a skilled facilitator could have done that. But if you are learning engineering skills and your engineering skills are about whether a bridge is going to fall down or a bridge is not going to fall down, there are wrong approaches and there are wrong answers. The yes and approach doesn't apply to exams, right? It doesn't apply to certifications.
Yeah.
The yes and approach is about a community experience where people are asking questions and contributing. So it's my belief that it should never, ever be the case, regardless of whether it's an engineering skill or whatever, that someone contributing something, asking a question, or anything along those lines could be shut down with a hard no. I think there is always the opportunity to be curious as a facilitator, as an instructor, and say, that's not what we were thinking about, or I can see some problems with that, but why don't we dig in and help me understand a little bit better what you meant by that, or help me understand a little bit better why you think that design would be good, or let's explore this together. I have some ideas. What does everyone else think? None of those are a no, right? None of those are a no, but, and none of those are a wrong kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of medical studies too, where there are points where you have to maybe not say no, but there has to be a redirect or a building on something. Or
say more about that.
Well, if it's a life-saving situation, if it's a matter of life and death, if I
Oh,
give
okay. So
if
someone's doing CPR wrong.
or I'm
Are we
giving
gonna?
someone the wrong blood type in a
I kind of want. There's
transfusion.
another Office reference there for
Oh,
us if
is
we want to
there?
do with Dwight with the CPR dump. But no, let's not do that. Let's not go there.
But I mean, if I'm going to do something that is definitely going to kill someone, and I could see there being
Okay.
a redirect.
All right.
But does that have to be a no? And you've talked about engineering. If I do this, the bridge is going to fall down, and people are going to be harmed, and costs are going to be incurred. It can't just be a straight up yes.
I think it's important to like be really clear about what we're talking about because I think it's relevant for education. It's relevant for instructional design. Applying, the lens of what we do a lot of these days. Is this synchronous learning or asynchronous learning? An e-learning experience that someone's going to take on their own, and there is support and there are questions and so on, versus synchronous, where it's effectively instructor-led. So whenever it's instructor-led and there's pausing for questions, I think that's a moment where you have to really be respectful of a yes and kind of vibe. But again, like I said, if you're evaluating someone's performance, you don't have to say yes. You can do CPR wrong. You can build a bridge wrong. That is not what's being said here. It's not giving carte blanche. We're not saying everyone is right and everyone is a beautiful sunflower. No, we are saying, however, that when it comes to conversation and discussion and team building and building a community, then the way that you respond to ideas that are wonderful and the way that you respond to ideas that are not wonderful affects the culture of the people around you,
Yep.
right?
Yeah. Whether that's in a classroom or a training room or in an office
Or your
yeah.
living room,
Yeah, absolutely.
around the dinner table.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Maybe it's just a matter of not limiting learning opportunities and experiences to things like drill and kill activities and multiple choice and fill in the blanks and that sort of thing. Maybe it's about having those checks and balances for the technical knowledge that you need to have to not kill someone, but also providing opportunities for discussion where things aren't so black and white, where you can incorporate the yeses more, give opportunities for people to explain themselves and to talk to each other. And maybe learning by rote is it's a playground for no, and it can't be the only thing we use.
Well, almost by definition, right? When you're learning by rote, what are you doing? You're just repeating something that someone has told you is the right answer. That can work for arithmetic, and it can work for things that are essentially like arithmetic. But really, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about
I've actually seen primary school teachers, elementary school teachers use a yes and approach to arithmetic too, where it's sort of, okay, well, 1 + 1 is 2. Okay, cool. You've written the numbers, yes, and I want you to show me in a different way 1 + 1 = 2. And then some kids draw,
Ooh.
2 fingers, and then some kids draw 2 apples and or do tally marks or that sort of thing. So I think even maybe things that seem like yes no answers, there may be opportunity for yes.
I'm realizing now that the best educators that I've ever had, the people who best inspired me to understand complicated things, well, they were doing this all the time.
Yeah. My calculus teacher treated me with yes and I would have been toast without it. I have no idea how I passed that class. But he took a yes and approach. It wasn't just wrong. He was okay. Well, you got that. Let's build on that. Let's explore this and let's. So thank goodness for him.
Yeah, well, I guess it all comes down to, in my mind, in my opinion, this, and when I say this, I mean like all learning in the universe comes down to curiosity and confidence. I think if you have those two things in right measure, not too much of one or the other, if you're all confidence and no, then it may mean you're not opening up. But I think with that right balance of confidence and curiosity, anyone is going to ultimately get to stuff. And I think those who are most willing to ask the questions and to put themselves out there, they're going to get the most help most quickly.
They'll get the most yes and. Yeah.
Very nice.
I can remember it didn't. I'm trying to think if I have said no as as an educator to very many learners, and I don't think I have. Now I always taught in subject areas where there was lots of room for yes and. The humanities is yes and central, which is awesome. But there were a couple times where I had to just say flat out no. And it was usually when someone was tiptoeing into something hateful
Okay.
or making other students feel that the classroom was not a safe learning experience.
Okay.
And I think I can think of one or two instances, not very many, but one or two instances where I just said flat out no.
There's only so many times you're going to yes and the finger guns.
There are times where you kind of have to put your foot down, but it wasn't about the learning material that we were dealing with, and it wasn't really about that particular learner. It was kind of guarding my classroom, preserving the bubble of
Right.
the circle of safety.
That really makes sense to me, especially when you might be talking about really tough topics.
Oh yeah,
Religion and ethics and
politics.
politics. Totally get that. I think there's less risk of like really poor form like that in technical classes.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. I've had plenty of learners say no to me.
Yeah. Or plenty
shut me down. But
or plenty of learners saying, "Miss, why don't I get that A plus?"
yeah, yeah.
You can shut that down too.
Yeah. Here's a question. Can we use no more effectively? I think we've sort of established that once in a while you kind of have to throw it out there. What can we do to no in those instances where you can't just say yes and? How do we make no more effective? Less about finger guns.
Yeah. Well, incidentally, the second lesson from improv is the power of a callback to a previous joker. So I appreciate how finger guns keep coming back up. For me, my secret weapon, it's not so secret, is help me understand. It's the phrase help me understand. And instead of no, you're wrong, it can be, okay, help me understand.
Just in case you're not wrong and I'm just missing something. Or you want to go back a little bit.
Well, listen, I don't have to tell the philosopher about the Socratic method.
Yeah. Oh,
Right?
Socrates didn't really say no a whole lot. It was always, that's interesting. Let's play that tape forward.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying don't say no. Ask them to explain. And the best educators, by simply asking the learner questions, are going to take them down all kinds of really great paths.
Mm-hmm.
And probably in a way that learner is going to remember that stuff forever, because it was their idea, or so they thought.
Yeah. So I messed up. I made a mistake. I was in the weeds. I went the wrong way, but someone still cared enough to get me back, to not leave me behind while everyone else moved on, but to pause for a moment and bring me back up to speed.
Right. Well, or maybe they don't even have that moment where they're saying I was wrong. They're just led so gently around to some traditional wisdom or a traditional approach. They didn't spend time feeling wrong. So that confidence and that curiosity is not squashed.
There's that great quote from Douglas Adams.
Ooh, Douglas Adams.
Yes, and more Douglas Adams.
Yes.
I may not have gone where I intended to go, but I think I have ended up where I intended to be. I think I got that
where
right.
I needed to be.
Or what I
something like that.
needed
Yeah.
to be. Yeah. That's kind of the idea, isn't it? I didn't get that right on the first try, but somebody helped me and I got there. I got where I needed to go eventually. And without so much fear of screwing up or missing something, with, as you said, the opportunity to be curious and to play around a little more.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's the beauty of yes and instead of straight up no, is that there's space to screw up a little bit.
Well, there's one thing that we haven't really talked about in improv, which is it's fun. It's funny. Like an audience will dig it. The participants will really enjoy themselves.
Because of the screwing up and because of the moments of uncertainty.
Yeah. And I did it. Yeah, and I didn't mean to that time. Yeah, and because sometimes people have ideas that are better than yours in that moment. And where they take it adds to what you were thinking of and makes it better. And what I think is a good thought experiment is how does this get done at any sort of scale. We're talking about classrooms and we're talking about improv classes and we're talking about tutoring. Those are kind of the examples that we've kind of popped up here. But if I think about corporate learning and things where you're building an experience where, you may be training dozens, hundreds, thousands of people, and you're going to have several or dozens of facilitators. How do you roll this out? What is that like? From my perspective, I know we think a lot about blended learning. Blended learning where some of the stuff is done individually with headphones on, you're doing some interactive learning, you may be doing a little certification or quiz or whatever. The kind of e-learning that everyone has experienced. But with blended learning, you also incorporate just the right amount of live facilitated stuff. And it may be in person or it may be on Zoom or whatever. And those are the moments, I think, where really a heavy emphasis on facilitation of ideas and conversation versus knowledge transfer, right?
I'm going to open up the top of your head and dump this in.
Dump this in.
Yeah.
Just drop it in. And there's
Yeah.
something wrong with you if it doesn't immediately shine out your eyeballs, right? That is really kind of problematic. And I, certainly a lot of training that's delivered by subject matter experts in the corporate space is someone talking and talking and talking in front of a PowerPoint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always been our belief that those kinds of scenarios need to be, if not completely replaced, at least significantly augmented with facilitated experiences where people are forming a community, where people are sharing, where people are talking through challenges. And this is where we need to support those facilitators, or rather, we need to support that subject matter expert who's had a training task thrust upon them to not just think about talking over their PowerPoint, but instead, how do you foster conversation? How do you bring out role play? And all of a sudden, this is starting to look like a scenario where improv totally makes sense.
Yeah.
And boy, does that lock in learning.
All roads lead to drama class.
Right? And I think there's some subject areas where this feels very natural: leadership, dealing with clients in difficult situations, all of those kinds of conversational things. But why not also more technical topics? This is about brainstorming. This is about how to build that bridge. Well, as kids, you're often thrown a bunch of popsicle sticks and balsa wood. And is that really that different for that group of engineers or those budding engineers than having them act out a scene? And are you going to say, no, that's wrong, as someone starts? No, you're going to let them build it out and they're going to learn together.
I challenge people to expand that to how we learn and grow as a culture in general too. Let's spill this into social media, and let's spill this into, way past the education system, but how we function, how we vote for people, how we make decisions about what's important to us as a community.
Yes.
Let's make all kinds of room for yes and.
I want to add an example. I was talking to someone recently, and this is the head of training for an organization that is going through a major organizational shift. They're shifting from individual departments that each do one thing to pods of cross-disciplinary teams. So imagine they don't build cars, but imagine if they did. It's not like there's a group of painters and there's a group of assembly people and there's a group of test people. Instead, they've got all of the different roles represented together in a pod.
So every group has a butcher, baker, candlestick maker.
Thank you. That's a much better generic example than what I was coming up with. But the intention behind this is the butcher can learn from the candlestick maker. Mm-hmm. Why? Because there are transferable elements to it. And at the end of the day, they're building something together. They all need to better understand what each other's jobs are. They need to support each other. And guess what happens when people with different backgrounds and skills work closely together on stuff? They cross-pollinate. They learn from each other in really amazing ways. I know, talking to this learning person, that they were experiencing a lot of challenge in standing this up. Suddenly, training doesn't look the way it did before. Suddenly, evaluating teams doesn't look the way it did before. Suddenly, the way you recruit doesn't look the way it did before. But wow, look at the upside, the potential upside of this. And, that now starts to look like a troop of people. And that popped into my head because as we're thinking about improv, these really successful improv groups, they're called troops.
And they have a cast.
Very well put.
Very good. So yes to all of that. And I'd like to challenge everyone listening to give themselves a little bit of space, a little bit of yes and to give the people that are learning around them a little bit of yes and.
And if not, you can always pull out the finger guns.
No finger guns.
No finger guns. Thanks for learning with us.
If today's conversation sparked something for you, share it with someone you care about or someone you're still figuring things out with.
You can find us online or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget,
we are all unfinished minds. Let's keep learning.